Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. Han coming up in this edition. Israel and the US see an opportunity for a truce after Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar's death. Leaders of European Union member states remain divided over the Ukraine crisis, and Chinese authorities remain upbeat about the country's economy with 4.8% growth in the first 3 quarters. We begin in the Middle East. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the death of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar offers a chance for peace in the Middle East. He urged the Palestinian militant group to lay down arms and release all Israeli hostages. Israel's army earlier confirmed that it had killed Sinwar in southern Gaza. There was no immediate response from Hamas. Israel considers Sinwar as the mastermind behind the October 7th attack on Israel last year. US President Joe Biden said it is time to move on and he is more hopeful for the prospects of a ceasefire in Gaza. The White House says Biden and Netanyahu have discussed ways to end the conflict. The US State Department said it will redouble efforts to mediate a truce between Israel and Hamas. Sarah Coates has details.
Well, this, of course, is something that is being widely celebrated here in Israel. We have seen pictures coming in of Israeli soldiers actually handing out sweets to vehicles, to people in vehicles driving by. Now, we've also heard from sources from within Hamas. They are saying that we've suffered a blow, but consultations about the future have begun. Now, it is understood that Khaled Mashal, he is one of the founding members of Hamas's Politburo, that he will step in place of Yahya Sinwar. Now, we've also seen a number of rallies going on here in Tel Aviv, and these are of the family members of the 101 Israeli hostages that do remain in the Strip. Now, what they want is they want to turn what is being seen as a military victory into a diplomatic victory to bring these hostages home. We've also heard from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He says that this is the beginning of the end of the day after. He says that the task isn't over.
Hamas is holding 101 hostages in Gaza, who are citizens of 23 countries, citizens of Israel, but citizens of many other countries. Israel is committed to doing everything in our power to bring all of them home. And Israel will guarantee the safety of all those who return our hostages. But to those who would harm our hostages, I have another message. Israel will hunt you down and bring you to justice.
Now, we've also heard from the Pentagon spokesperson, Pat Ryder. He's come out to say that there was not any direct involvement of US forces and that this was an Israeli operation.
That was Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv. Meanwhile, Hezbollah said it is moving to a new and escalating phase in its war against Israel, while Iran said the resistance will become stronger. Turning to the Americas, U.S. consumer spending power heading into the holiday quarter has come as an upside surprise. New economic data shows that advanced retail sales beat expectations for the month of September. Karina Mitchell breaks down the numbers.
So month over month, we saw an increase of 0.4% in September, better than the estimate of a rise of 0.3%, and much better than the 0.1 rise we saw in the prior month, which was pretty anemic. And if you look at the number that gets reported towards GDP, that's actually even higher than the 0.4% rise. So that's actually good for the economy. So where was the spending? Well, we saw clothing sales go up by 1.5%. Bars and restaurants saw a rise of 1%, and then miscellaneous retail stores up by 4%. All of these numbers much better than August, which is typically a big back-to-school shopping month. So we were all scratching our heads, you might remember, a little bit when those numbers came in weak. Now, on the flip side, we actually saw sales at gas stations go down by 1.6%. That's as fuel and energy prices continue to drop. And then we saw sales in electronic stores down by 3.3%. Home and furnishing stores also down. So within each of the sectors, we saw a little bit of choppiness. I spoke to one analyst to get his reaction on the data and for the shifting patterns in how American consumers are spending their money. Take a listen to what he had to say.
These numbers are still in positive territory. There has been underlying consumer strength. They could easily be negative. I mean, you could certainly foresee a scenario in which high inflation and high interest rates have squeezed people to the point that they're really cutting back. Instead, it's more of a treading water kind of situation where sales are growing, but they're basically growing because of inflation. And that's an important point for consumer sentiment, that people feel like they're spending more, but they're not really getting more.
So definitely the U.S. consumer is still resilient, but continuing to be cautious. And he says that spending patterns are starting to normalize. They are starting to rein in spending on things like travel and experiences, which has been really big over the last 18 months or so. And he says expect spending on holiday gifts to also come in a little bit. Now, this is something that was echoed by the National Retail Federation earlier this week, also saying that retail sales are starting to normalize. They expect to see holiday sales growth of up to 3.5%. That is a little bit lower than last year, where sales came in at 3.8%. That's as consumers continue to worry a little bit about inflation and which direction the economy is heading in. But overall, they are still resilient there. And getting back to basics, if you will, and waiting to see what the Federal Reserve does as far as cutting interest rates.
That was Karina Mitchell reporting. In Europe, leaders of European Union member states remain divided on the Ukraine crisis and failed to reach a new consensus at the summit in Brussels. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky attended the meeting and presented what he called a victory plan demanding NATO membership. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban referred to Zelensky's plan as more than frightening and called for peace talks rather than weapons deliveries to Ukraine. Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico criticized the European Council as a military cabinet. Meanwhile, European Council President Charles Michel reiterated calls for military and financial support for Kyiv. William Denslow has more.
Addressing EU leaders here at the European Council, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said that unity was a weapon, and the implementation of his victory plan could see the end to the war in Russia by next year. But convincing allies to go along with his proposals will be no easy task. Included in his plan for Kyiv's backers is to provide more weapons, and without conditions on how they're used. EU member states have expressed fears over supplying weapons to Ukraine that could be used to hit targets in Russian territory, for fear of sparking a wider conflict. Another sticking point, Zelensky's call to receive an invitation to join NATO. Zelensky also made that pitch directly to NATO defence ministers, gathering for a summit also being held here in Brussels on Thursday. The military alliance's new Secretary General Mark Rutte expressed support for Ukraine's membership, but was non-committal on a timeline.
The work we are doing together is making Ukraine stronger, more interoperable with NATO, and better prepared than ever to join our alliance. And I believe that all this work clearly constitutes a bridge to NATO membership. Ukraine will join the alliance, of course, when the time is right.
Here at the European Council, Ukraine wasn't the only issue on the agenda. The conflict in the Middle East was also discussed, with the EU's foreign policy chief Josep Borrell urging the US to do more to pressure Israel to improve the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Regarding the topic of domestic migration, Italy and Poland are among EU members pushing for controversial measures to curb irregular migration, a divisive topic and one that's likely to rumble on.
That was William Denslow in Brussels. The Kremlin, meantime, has warned that Ukraine's victory plan will lead to further escalation with the risk of direct conflict between Russia and NATO. Finally, in Asia, China's GDP grew 4.8% in the first three quarters, reaching nearly 95 trillion yuan. That's more than $13 trillion. The GDP expanded 4.6% in the third quarter alone. Deputy Commissioner Sheng Laiyun of the National Bureau of Statistics remains upbeat about China's economy, despite domestic and international challenges.
Overall, the economic performance is stable and made steady progress. In September, major indicators are improving. The economy is on an upward trajectory. There are more positive factors accumulating, sustaining economic recovery and growth.
Recent stimulus measures include support for the monetary, fiscal and housing sectors. With more on the performance of China's economy, here's Cao Chufeng.
The year-on-year GDP growth for the first three quarters of 2024 came in at 4.8%. At the beginning of this year, the Chinese government set a target of around 5% for its annual GDP growth of 2024. 4.8 is still slightly shy of that, which means right now the pressure is mounting on the fourth quarter to outperform previous figures. the National Bureau of Statistics says the GDP growth so far is still within the expectations of the Chinese government. And also the year-on-year GDP growth for each quarter of 2024 remained stable, which means that the Chinese economy is generally stable. Now, there are a number of quite good figures that came out across different sectors, including the total value added of industrial enterprises above the designated size growing by 5.8%. The total retail sales of consumer goods went up by 3.3%. The total volume of trading goods increased by 5.3%, and the urban unemployment rate went down by 0.2%. We still do need time to see the newly implemented policies to take effect. Now, the National Bureau of Statistics says that despite facing challenges, the Chinese economy remains stable and is steadily growing, and also that the Chinese government rolled out a series of policies in the third quarter covering a wide range of areas, including real estate, private enterprises, consumer spending, and we might be seeing some strong performance in the fourth quarter.
That was Cao Chufeng reporting from Beijing. Government officials, scholars, representatives from media organizations have gathered in Beijing to discuss peace, development and security. The Global South Think Tanks Forum took place ahead of the BRICS Leaders Summit in Russia next week. Chen Ziyuan reports.
World leaders, officials, and experts from more than 76 countries and regions participated in the Global South Think Tanks forums in the Chinese capital on Wednesday, attending both on-site and virtually.
As a member of the Global South, China has long stood in solidarity with other fellow Global South countries through thick and thin, and has been an advocate for and an important player in South-South cooperation. Going into the future, China will stand united with other Global South countries to shoulder responsibilities and play a key role. Let's work together to implement the Global Development Initiative, the Global Security Initiative, and the Global Civilization Initiative, and contribute the strength of the Global South to the building of a community with a shared future for mankind.
The event was hosted by the International Department of the CPC Central Committee and China Media Group, and was organized by CGTN.
We will actively build bridges and connections for dialogue and mutual learning and mutual understanding between China and Global South countries. We'll also provide a platform for Global South think tanks to amplify their voices in promoting win-win cooperation and advocating fairness and justice. We stand ready to work with think tanks from the Global South to contribute more to the building of the community with a shared future for mankind, and to help the world move toward a brighter future of peace, security, prosperity, and progress.
Participating bodies also issued an initiative to promote cooperation amongst the Global South countries.
I really think that we play an important role in sharing knowledge, in promoting dialogue, promoting understanding, especially among countries that are so far away from each other, which is the case for Brazil and China. So we have geographical distance, we have the language issues, a lot of gaps of knowledge that think tanks are the best instruments for us to build upon.
Yeah, I feel so excited because one particular issue that has always affected the Global South has to do with disunity. So this bringing together people of different backgrounds, people of different ideas. It is a knowledge-sharing platform.
That was Chen Ziyuan reporting. Now recapping today's headlines. Israel and the US see an opportunity for a truce after Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar's death. Leaders of European Union member states remain divided over the Ukraine crisis, and Chinese authorities remain upbeat about the country's economy with 4.8% growth in the first 3 quarters. That's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a 1-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Wang Zihang. Thank you for listening.